my goodness, that means the time you hear the music, you hear it clicking into your headphones, through your car stereo, whatever you're listening to right now, whatever you're listening to, the Because Cannabis podcast, we are here with another brand new episode. We're hoping, I should finish that word there, Dustin Kava, we're hoping that you're listening to us on YouTube, where we have brand new shows every single Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. Brand new shows of Because Cannabis, produced and brought to you by Wayward Media, wayward.media on the internet. Follow us socially at MEETWM, MEETWM. We'll get all of our posts and such out there. And of course, if you're listening to us on YouTube, please do us a favor and hit that subscribe button right below. And if you're listening to us on audio, all of our shows are available anywhere that you listen to audio. Give us a follow. Give us a rating, give us a 5 stars, give us all that good stuff. It helps. It helps everything that we are trying to do. Is we are trying to spread the word. We are trying to talk about positivity. We are trying to talk, as we do every single week, Dustin, about our relationships with the plant. And let me ask you, oh, by the way, Dustin Kava, how are you today?
I'm doing awesome today. It's actually been a gratitude-filled day, surprisingly.
Well, I am happy to hear that, a gratitude-filled day. I feel, Dustin, that we try to talk a lot about relationships, whether it's with the plant, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's with your bosses or employees, and trying to manage that. Relationships are very important in the cannabis industry. And I'd like to think, Dustin Kava, that I am a healthy person, right? I'd like to think I'm healthy. I try to do the right thing. I try to eat the right foods. I used to be more active. You know, I play a tremendous amount of disc golf, so I'm hiking with a purpose everywhere I go. So you know that I try to stay a little bit healthy, but I admit, I am but a mere mortal, Dustin Kava. I know it may not seem that way, but I am but a mere mortal, and I am but a human being, and I am flawed to err. Is some famous philosopher, I don't know where this came from. It's some famous quote. You've heard it. To err, ERR, is human. Dustin, is that how I say? Is that the right quote? Did I totally mess up the quote? I'm not smart at all. I just making stuff up as I'm going.
I have
There's
honestly
someone right
never
now
heard
who's
that
listening
quote,
to this.
so I really think that you're full of shit.
No, there is all sorts of people, maybe even our guests right now. They're like, no, this is the quote. This is the person that said it, you morons. But we try. We try, right? That's just what relationships are about. It's about giving the best that you got in that moment, but not all relationships, Dustin, not all of them are healthy. What do you, Dustin, have an unhealthy relationship with? What do you not have a good relationship? Is it food? Is it video games? What do you have an unhealthy relationship where if someone was sitting above you, 30,000 foot view, they could judge you, judgy McJudge-a-lots that they are on the internet these days. What do you have an unhealthiness with?
Work. I love work so much. I 80 hours a week. If I love it. I thrive on the busyness and the seeing stuff through and just getting shit out of my head and then creating with it. It's, yeah, I definitely overwork myself. But I love
mine's
it.
just cashews. I have an unhealthy relationship with cashews. I could eat freaking cashews all day, all night. There's salted, honey coat them. You put whatever, sriracha. Yeah, I'll take that. You put whatever you want on cashews, and I'm going to have them. And we're joined today by Dr. Amanda Reiman, my personal plants and New Frontier data, easy for me to say. What, Dr. Amanda, do you have an unhealthy relationship? What is the one thing, despite all your knowledge, all your degrees, all this information you have gathered, and all these healthy relationships you like to have, like at mypersonalplants.com, what do you, Dr. Amanda, when the lights go down, when you hit off on the internet and no one's watching, what do you have an unhealthy relationship with?
Chocolate.
Oh, dark chocolate, milk chocolate. What's your chocolate vibe?
All the chocolate. All of it. Well, not white chocolate, because that's not chocolate. Let's get one thing straight from the get-go. That is cocoa butter. That is not chocolate. But yeah, white chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate. I will eat chocolate anytime, anywhere, for any reason. It doesn't even have to, and I'm embarrassed, it doesn't even have to be good chocolate. Like I will eat like the crappy, cheap chocolate. As long as it kind of tastes like chocolate, then I'm down to clown.
We are
good to
coming
go.
up on the time of the cheapest chocolate. Like it's the, around the holiday season here. And so we got Easter's known to have a lot of candy. And I remember growing up, like when you have those baskets, right? You tend to have like the good chocolate, like even a real chocolate. I'm using real chocolate in air quotes, like a Hershey's, or you'd go all out and you get like a Dove or a Godiva. But every once in a while you get that basically just wrapped chocolate. It's like shaped like a bunny. It's a little powdery when you unwrap it and it kind of tastes like chocolate. But as Amanda said, yeah, it's good enough. It's good.
No,
enough.
it's definitely good enough. I mean, every year I have to get one of those Cadbury cream eggs.
Yes, I was just gonna say, yeah.
Yes, shout out to Cadbury cream eggs. How are we feeling on Peeps while we're here right now?
Oh, I freeze them. Do you freeze them? Let alone eat them, but do you?
I have never done that. You're opening up a whole new world to me, Dustin.
Yes, you freeze. Okay, so you freeze it and then do you eat it frozen or like is it?
Yeah,
thawed?
the family. They don't really. They're like that. There's so much sugar and shit in there, so it doesn't really freeze completely. But yeah, it's the family. It's known like they have to be in the freezer for 24 hours, and then you can open the package. The whole family. Everyone across the board.
All right, we have rules. I have to tell you, Dr. Amanda Reiman from My Personal Plants, New Frontier Data. My wife also is really anti-white chocolate. Like she gives a whole tirade. I've never really knew and understood how non-chocolate white chocolate was until about 5 years ago, which as a 50-year-old man is a little embarrassing. But maybe you right now are about to be educated. So as we know, white chocolate's not chocolate, right? It's what?
It's cocoa butter.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, right. See, Dustin, we're learning. So they take cocoa butter and they just like make it into a hard salt. I don't know how.
I don't know how it's made. I just reject it completely. So I don't want to know about white chocolate and how they make it, and because I'm never going to eat it.
Last thing on chocolate, and then we'll talk cannabis. Though they kind of go together. Chocolate and cannabis are wonderful together, almost like peanut butter. I have found as I've aged, I've really drifted towards the more bitter, like the more darker chocolate, like cacao, whatever, I don't know what that word means, but I say it a lot in normal conversation, like I know what it is. But I've moved towards that when I see the percentage. It's like my THC. As I get older, I need that percentage to tick a little higher. I also need the percentage on the chocolate to tick a little more bitter. Do you find that you have, as you've gotten older, like your taste buds drift towards that more bitter chocolate, or have you always been like down with the dark chocolate and the really bittery chocolate?
No, that's a really good point. When I was younger, if given like the little Hershey's miniature and the special dark, I was like trading the special dark for like a Snickers,
half of a Snickers. Yeah.
But I definitely appreciate. I belong to a chocolate collective.
Oh,
and I get bars of chocolate sent to me every month, and it's like, internationally curated dark chocolate with all of the interesting spices and floral notes. And I mean, I like the darker chocolate. Although, again, I do not discriminate unless it's white chocolate. I will down milk chocolate like nobody's business as well.
I like that. It's almost, by the way, when you're describing kind of the chocolate, it sounds a little bit like people describe cannabis these days. There's our transition, right? They have florally scents. We talk all about the terpenes. We talk all about the cannabinoid profiles. And I would imagine what you're doing at mypersonalplants.com. Dr. Amanda Reiman's the founder of My Personal Plants, or Personal Plants, mypersonalplants.com, and the chief knowledge officer of New Frontier Data. It's twice in a row now I've said data, like I'm from England. New Frontier Data. So from seed to self-resilience, developing a healthy relationship with cannabis. And so we'll start there, Dr. Amanda, because that's how I found you. That's how I found you. I was surfing the internet. I was on Twitter, and I want to talk about this right off the go because it was exciting for me to learn about you. Just recently decided to take, for research reasons, kind of a extended break from consuming cannabis, despite being very well versed in the industry, and kind of documented it on your Twitter, just each day, how you were feeling, what was going on and such. So let's start there. As someone who works in the industry, someone who's been around in the industry a long time, you've been teaching for a long time, you've been UC Berkeley, you've been an activist for this plant for almost 2 decades. Why kind of, and this is a buzzword, everyone talks about tolerance break and resetting it, Cali sober, and all these other buzzwords that come out from where you are out west. Why kind of take that break, and then why also talk about it, right? People talk about the break, but you made a point to document the feelings, both emotionally and physically, that was going through your body at Twitter. Why kind of take that journey, and why share it with us?
Well, that's a great question. I'm 46. Don't mind saying it. I've been consuming cannabis regularly since I was about 19. And I say regularly as in daily. I was a daily consumer for many, many years, and I have medical issues that made cannabis useful to me. I had arthritis that I was diagnosed with in my early 20s. I didn't want to get on a regime of painkillers, especially not at that age. I had big concerns about what long-term use of some of those pharmaceuticals was going to do to me. And I've always just liked the way cannabis made me feel. It made me feel happy. It made me feel euphoric. It made me more interested in people and places and things. And so I was very much into consumption. And you said I was into advocacy. So I, still to this day believe no one belongs in jail for using cannabis or any other drug for that matter. And so in the early days before legalization, I worked very hard on the social justice components of prohibition and really trying to undo that. And all of the time, using cannabis regularly, and it never really deterred me from doing anything. I got my PhD, I became a professor at Berkeley, all the time being a regular cannabis consumer, and I really felt like I am the one that is breaking the stereotype, right? Like I am the unique individual who is not a lazy stoner. And my tolerance was exceptionally high. So
Sure.
Unlike folks that were consuming and having too much, which kind of deterred them from consuming again, I was popping 100 milligrams and going to the gym. Like it was just part of my lifestyle for many, many years. And then something happens when you get into your 40s and things start to hit differently. And I found that my tolerance really started to plummet. And, whereas I could use a whole lot of THC prior, now, I was having risks of having too much and having cannabis overdose, which is basically anxiety, paranoia, rapid heart rate, just not a good time. And so given that it had been about 7 years since I had taken any kind of substantial break from cannabis, except for, random surgeries that I had where I stopped using, for a few days before, I said, you know what? I really want to reset my relationship with cannabis. And I feel like it needs to evolve, but that it's not going to do that while I'm still using it all the time. Like I need to take a break and have some distance from it so that I can return back to it in a way that was serving me. So going back to my education on addiction, I know that it takes about 28 days to break a habit. Excuse me. And cannabis for me was definitely a habit. I was getting to a certain time of day and I was like, oh, it's time to use cannabis.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want that to be the truth. I wanted cannabis to be a ritual and not a habit. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to give it up for 28 days and I'm going to see what happens. And the reason I was really open about it is because I feel that there are a lot of other people out there who fear that they're going to lose their stoner cred, or that they're going to appear weak, or that they're going to appear like an old fuddy-duddy if they decide that they need to move away from cannabis for a little bit. And I see it happen in the industry, right?
Yeah.
Like I see people use their cannabis use as some kind of ego measuring stick.
Yeah, it's a badge of honor or something. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like how dedicated they are to the plant, right?
Right.
Like, how much you consume means that you love the plant more than someone else. Right. And I didn't think that was a very good message to send because we live in a society that really sucks at moderation. Like we're terrible at it. And even though you can't die from a cannabis overdose, it doesn't mean that cannabis is without risk. And so I think in the effort of having a balanced, healthy relationship with the cannabis plant, we have to examine our own relationships with the cannabis plant and figure out if it's serving us, how it may not be serving us. And the best way to do that is to get some distance. So I decided to go the 28 days. I decided to document my experience because I know there's other folks that are considering doing it and have anxiety about it. Like I had people right. Like I really feel like I should do this. Like I really feel like I should, step away. But the idea of not having it like sends me into like anxiety. And so I wanted folks to know that it's okay. You can do it, and that it isn't easy, to be honest. When you've been doing something regularly for years and years and years, no matter what it is, stopping it feels weird.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like there's a void in your life. It feels like there's something that you should be doing and your brain's kind of telling you to do it, but you're not doing it. And that's uncomfortable. There's definitely withdrawals associated with your endocannabinoid system needing to kind of get its act together and start working regularly again. But after doing that for 28 days, when I came back to it, one, my tolerance completely dropped. Now it's like 10 milligrams and I'm like good for the evening, which was like, I wouldn't even consider a 10 milligram product before because I was like, I'm not going to feel that. And so it's obviously a lot more economical. And I will say one of the best outcomes of really reducing my use are the dreams.
Had this.
Right?
Yeah, we just talked about this with a recent guest. I don't dream. I cannot remember the last time I dream. And we had, was it Warren Bobrow? I'm not sure if it was Warren Bobrow.
I think it was Warren, yes.
Who was talking about despite all his cannabis consumption, he still has the most vivid dreams. Dustin, you dream, right?
I haven't. My dreams are so silly. Like I don't have the visuals. If I wake up the next day and I say I remember my dream, it's like I remember in my body what it felt like for the dream as opposed to the visual of like walking through it. So it's
I could not tell
so
you.
Weird.
I couldn't tell you the last time I dreamed. I had recently had to stop for a few days for a procedure, just like you mentioned. And as soon as I stop 2 nights, on the second night, it's like an acid trip times 10. Like my dreams are vivid and they are colorful and they are exotic and they are out of this world. Like it's like a David Lynch movie happening inside of my brain because I don't tend to have it. And I am a regular user. I've been consuming every day for a long time. I haven't had that break yet, which is why you caught my eye, because I am like you or like the people you're trying to talk to. I'm a little nervous about it. I am a little anxious about it. And I've been talking with Dustin. We're trying to slow down on my drinking too. Like these things are habitual for me. They're things I do not because I want to, just because like I'm addicted, right? In some ways, like I feel like I should. And if I'm not, it's like, why aren't I? Why aren't I?
Yeah. And so much of that is habit, right? It's just our bodies and our brains are creatures of habit, quite literally. And they like to rely on behavior they've done before. They know what to expect. They know what it's going to bring you. And so you get that motivation to continue habits because it soothes us. It soothes our brains. It soothes our psyches. And that's why, I tell people, look, you can stop for 48 hours and it'll benefit you. But if you're trying to break a habit, you really need to give it several weeks because that's what it takes to form a habit. And that's what it takes to break a habit. So if you're trying to develop a new habit, like exercising, for example, if you can do it regularly for 28 days, then you shift into a mindset where not doing it feels weird. So you're trying to get to the point where doing it feels normal and not doing it feels weird, or vice versa, where not doing it feels normal and doing it feels special or unique. And so that's really what I was trying to get to. And, thankfully, after 28 days, I really got there. And now, I can consume once or twice in the evening and still have amazing dreams, which made me so happy because I miss dreaming. And I'm like you, Dustin, like I would wake up and be like, I feel like I had a dream where I was like in some water or something. Or all my dreams took place in like a mall where I was trying to dial a phone incorrectly. And so now I'm having like really vivid and beneficial and fruitful dreams. Now, again, if you're somebody that's using cannabis because your dreams are not good, and there are folks out there, whether it's PTSD or other trauma, THC disrupts REM. So it disrupts the part of the sleep cycle where you dream. So if you're looking to not dream, cannabis is a very useful tool, but that is not most of us, right? Most of us are not experiencing nightmares or night terrors, and dreaming can actually be a great way to funnel creativity, to come up with solutions, to discover how you really feel about things. So yeah, the dreaming was a great thing that I was able to hang on to even after going back to consuming.
It almost breaks my heart that I never thought about the trauma in the dreams for some people, and
yeah,
how using cannabis as that tool in that way is, I never thought about it. And I think about cannabis as a tool in the wellness toolkit, and that habit that I have with it is not me pulling out the tool when I need it and when it's the right moment. It's me pulling out it because it's my favorite go-to and I think I need it all the time. And a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, where I can even see that in my own life.
Well, no, that's a great point. I mean, it's like if you love hammers, it's like taking a hammer and swinging it everywhere you go, even if there's no nail or you don't need to hammer something. Just because you're so used to having it in your hand and using it, that putting it down feels odd. And I think we need to be open about this. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do with personal plants, is I feel like we need to be more open and honest about cannabis as a habit, and, evaluating whether that's serving you, how you can change the habit if you don't like it. And unfortunately, because during Prohibition, the messaging was all cannabis is bad, never use it, it's terrible, it's the devil's lettuce and all of that stuff. As activists, we could not be vulnerable to those arguments. So we kind of took the other direction and we were like, no, cannabis is great for everything all the time. No matter who you are, there's no negative. And that was out of necessity. But now that we have legalization and now that we have research and things to really dive into the cannabis plant, I think we need to take a very measured approach, and that cannabis is good for everybody, or for anybody, but not everybody. Not all the time.
No, it's right. It's something we talk about a lot. We've had a few different people on here before. We're talking with Dr. Amanda Reiman from Personal Plants and New Frontier Data, mypersonalplants.com, developing a healthy relationship with cannabis. With that same thing, people who are activists who just don't find any fault, right? It's a magic plant. It's got no negatives. And what we're going to see, we've already seen it a little bit, what we're going to see as legalization happens, and now you have scientific, say federally funded scientific researchers who are now not afraid to touch the plant because of its federal illegality in the states and what they're doing, researching it more, getting more involved. We know historically that most of the research on the plant has been done with very low grade, at least on a federal level, and maybe not overseas, some amazing stuff that they're doing over in Israel and such. But we're seeing, especially in the US, more and more researchers get involved, and they're going to find some negatives. Right? Not terrible things. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to find, but there's going to be negatives. Maybe it's just the fact of combustion and putting that smoke into your lungs. Like that can't be super, super great. And that's why we see more and more modern ways to consume it, nebulization, the different edibles and such, or topicals. So I appreciate that. How has that been, say, amongst advocacy peers of yours? Are they okay with the fact that science is going to and research is going to find some faults and some negatives? Or do you find that even amongst kind of your peers that they're still really pushing the let's not find anything wrong with this plant angle?
I would say both. There's definitely folks who are like, look, we're going to do research and sometimes we're going to find benefits and sometimes we're going to find harms, but that's much better than propaganda, right? And just kind of trying to elicit a feeling to change someone's mind, right? We do want to have good data because we want to develop policies that are public health focused. So I do think a lot of activists are welcoming the opportunity to really learn the truth about some of these commonly held beliefs around cannabis. But then you definitely have folks that don't want to hear it. Yeah. And, if I post something online where I say that you can overdose on cannabis, like, oh my gosh, like the wave of criticism. Yeah. And I'm like, y'all, I'm not saying anything crazy. Like,
right.
You can't die.
But that panic attack is, like when it happens out in public, when it happens, at the most inopportune times, it is a very real experience. It is something where, even the most seasoned, in my life, in my partying years, 20 years ago, in all of the extremes of everything I've ever done, the thing that I was most scared on, the thing that got me the most terrified was cannabis. And that's a huge reality for this plant that everybody has this, it's perfect, it's just this most wonderful 100% positive thing, and it's not always that, and you've always had that activist portion of you, but there's this seemingly need and drive to educate and explain to others, even that, like, I want to talk about my experience through this, not just hear the internal dialogue in my head and see that maybe I personally need to do this. It's, I want to write this down because it may be beneficial to someone else. What drives that in you?
Well, I really think that's my background as a social worker. So, going to school for social work and really understanding how to communicate with other people, part of it is putting yourself out there and letting folks know they're not alone. And so, when I hear people say, oh, there's no such thing as a cannabis overdose, I feel like that invalidates a lot of people's experiences. And that's not fair. And we shouldn't be doing that, right? So if I'm out there and I've had a cannabis overdose and someone who's very high up as an activist is telling me they don't exist, well, what does that mean for me? And so I know that there are people who struggle with their cannabis use. One of the things that kind of compelled me to talk about this was I discovered this subreddit called Leaves. And it's got a very big following, and it's full of mostly younger people who have cannabis dependence. And they're trying to support each other on stopping their cannabis use or reducing their cannabis use. And I feel like these folks need a voice, right? I mean, the industry is going to market to them because the industry wants them to consume. When we look at the alcohol industry, most of the alcohol is consumed by like the top 1% of drinkers. It's not the people that are drinking on holidays or special occasions. It's the people who are regular drinkers. So that's who the alcohol industry is going to market to. So when we see all of these high THC products in dispensaries and it's really hard to find lower, milder products, it's because the dispensaries and the cannabis industry know that their consumer that's going to spend the most money is the person that's consuming a lot of THC. But that really leaves out a whole segment of the population that's looking to have a more balanced experience with cannabis. And it doesn't account for the fact that if people are using very high THC products for long periods of time, especially if they're starting when they're very young, they can definitely develop dependence and other issues. So I feel like if we're going to have cannabis around us as a legal product for a long time, and we're going to develop the kind of relationship with the plant that the plant wants to see, right? Because we've been evolving alongside this plant for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
Then we need to be really mindful about it because we could fuck it up really easily by over-consuming, by, letting kids have access, by kids starting on vape pens when they're 16. I mean, all of these things put the future of our relationship as a society with cannabis in jeopardy. And so I'm like the Dr. Ruth, right? So I'm coming in and I'm like, look, I know this is an easy topic to talk about. I know that it kind of like is controversial and you don't want your parents to find out. But like, let's be honest and let's just have open conversations so that we can all use this plant in a way that's beneficial and that isn't just escapist or overconsumption the way we tend to do with so many products, including chocolate.
Absolutely.
I do that.
So let's walk through. So I'm curious, your 28 days, do you have some highlights and lowlights you'd like to share? Like, so you went through this one, you did 28 days. Do you remember some of the highs and the lows that you went through in that time?
Well, the first few days were rough, but that was also because I gave up sugar for that month as well, which is like way more addictive than cannabis, to be honest, and is actually the original gateway drug. So giving up sugar, I had a lot of sugar withdrawals for the first couple days. And then, I did have some cannabis withdrawals. I had some trouble sleeping. I was a bit moody. I had a little bit of a lack of appetite. But again, that was my ECS. So, our endocannabinoid system regulates all of those functions. And when we're giving it phytocannabinoids from the plant, when we're just constantly ingesting those, our ECS is like, all right, I don't have to do much. This is on cruise control. Like, I'm just going to put my feet up. I'm going to relax. Like, I don't have to do anything. And so when you stop giving it cannabinoids from the plant, it takes a few days for your ECS to kind of get itself going again. And so some of the things it regulates, like mood, sleep, appetite, are going to have a little bit of a bumpy ride for a couple days until your ECS takes over. So that was, the first couple days were a bit tough, but I was very determined. So even when my brain was like, you could just smoke weed right now. And it would all be awesome.
You don't have to do this, Dr. Amanda. We know what will make you feel better. It's almost like a bad advertisement, though. It's almost like, come here, smoke me. That's what I feel like. Which makes it feel dirty when you say it that way.
Well, it's funny because my partner, who is also consuming, he did not take the break with me, but I made him get really shitty weed. So that, because I figured if we only had really shitty weed in the house, then I wouldn't be as tempted. But my brain was like, no, we're not doing that right now. And I was like, okay. So after the first couple of days, it actually became a lot easier. And then I would say one of the highlights for me, besides the dreaming, was that, I'm a regular exerciser. I was somebody who always liked to consume cannabis before exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been consuming cannabis pre-workout for decades. And I was a little bit nervous. I was like, am I even going to like this? Like, am I going to fall down? Like, what's going to happen? And, one of the things that our ECS does is release endocannabinoids during exercise. So the runner's high is endorphins, and it's also endocannabinoids. So in about week 2, I started to get intense euphoria from exercise.
Getting stoned from doing the right thing. The universe is like, I know you're on the right path. So let's.
It was crazy. Like I was so used to like prepping my workout with cannabis and then having it right after. But working out without any cannabis, once that ECS kind of got up and running, the euphoria that I got naturally from exercise was way better than what I ever got from the plant.
What about the build and repair after the exercise? Did you notice, a difference in the way your body felt the next day after the workout as opposed, with not smoking?
I have issues anyway. Like I said, I have arthritis, I have scoliosis, I have degenerative disc disease. So like my body never feels great after a workout, even on like my best day with the most cannabis. But I didn't notice anything really out of the ordinary. I was using topicals as needed because that doesn't break the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't cause intoxication. So if I had any severe joint pain, I would go to that, but I really didn't feel a huge difference in terms of recovery time, not using cannabis.
So the big question then is at the end. So now the end is approaching. It sounds like you're handling it very well. You're past the bad days. Now you're into it. Now you're 28 days. You formed, as we talked earlier in the show, a new habit. Like you've had that time frame to form this new habit, and your new habit, Dr. Amanda, is not consuming cannabis before working out. It's not consuming cannabis before going to bed. Was there a moment, and I assume, let me ask you this. Are you back to consuming cannabis?
I am.
All right. Yep. So, was there a moment, 2 questions, that you thought about not going back to it? And then follow up, because we wanted to do this live on the air and you were a little nervous about this. We'll break the fourth wall. What was it like that first time? That's what everyone wants to know. So if you went back to it. So did you think about not going back? And we know, spoiler alert, that you did. What was it like when you ended up actually pulling the trigger and consuming THC?
So, I did think about that. I did have this moment where I was like, I feel great. Like I'm sleeping well, I'm eating well, my exercise is good. I'm not feeling depressed or anxious or, I'm feeling really good actually. But I do enjoy it, I think one of the things for me that cannabis really does is help me transition from work to personal. And you were saying, Dustin, that, that's what what you overconsume is work. I work from home. So, if I don't have something that breaks up my work and my home, I can just keep working. Like my brain, even if I'm not working, my brain is still in work mode.
Fair.
So exercise helps break that up, but cannabis always really helped break that up. I also am an anxious person. I'm very type A. I'm always like fiddling and fidgeting and what should I do? And my brain is just working on 1,000 miles a minute all the time. And cannabis does help quiet that. It helps bring me down. It helps relax me. So I definitely get utility from it. I don't really drink. So cannabis was kind of like the thing that I would do to change my mindset. So I decided I was going to go back to it, but with parameters, because it's very easy to fall back into a habit. Once you start doing it again. And it's very, very easy. And it's something yet, even though I've been back on it for about a month now, I still have to be pretty strict with myself. And I still have that little brain thing saying, oh, you should just have it right now. Oh, that would be great. But I'm staying to no on the weekdays, no consumption before 5.
Mm-hmm.
On the weekends, I lower that to 3 because it's the weekend.
Yeah.
But during the week, no consumption till 5. I have one thing at a time, so I'm not going to like sit down and have like 3 bowls. I'm going to have one, or I'm going to have one drink, or I'm going to have one edible.
Okay.
And then I'm going to put it away, and I'm not going to have any more for at least 2 hours. Because, so one of the other things I did at the beginning of the year was I stopped smoking. So I had been traditionally a cannabis smoker, joint smoker, bowl smoker. Like that was my preferred method of consumption.
That's mine.
And, the research, again, learning more about some of the risks of inhaling hot smoke. Over time, gum disease and different things from being a cannabis smoker, I decided to switch to flower vape at the beginning of the year. So now I just use flower vape or edibles or drink.
Which vape are you using right now?
I use the packs.
Good. Just they've actually just released another one recently in the last couple of months. But,
yeah, see, I don't use concentrates, so I don't need the one with like the dabbing attachment. I just use flour. So
I didn't like using it for the oil anyways. It dirtied the shit up too much. It wasn't consistent. For flour, it was pretty nice.
Yeah, for flour, it's great. So I use that. I use edibles, and again, nothing until the evening, and then one serving. And then waiting a couple hours, because that's the thing about habits. It's like potato chips, right? If the bag is sitting next to you and you're watching Netflix, like you're just eating it. You're not even paying attention to what you're doing. It's just there. If your brain is giving you positive reinforcement because of the salt and the fat, and you're just eating it. And so I really had to be careful that my consumption didn't become mindless again, that it was very intentional. And so those are the parameters that I'm sticking with. And again, I'll have days where work is super stressful and it's like 4:00 and I'm like, oh, but then I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so far I've been successful. The first time back, oh my God, I got so stoned. I mean, I would also. And that's why I didn't want to come and do it on the show.
I so wanted to.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I got it actually a lower THC flower. It was about 14% THC. I vaped one bowl and I was good for like the rest of the night. Now it's been a month. So now I'm finding I'm consuming like twice on the weekdays and maybe like 3 times on the weekends, again, spaced apart. But that's all I need. I don't need to sit and have like 3 bowls or like a huge joint like I used to do when I really don't need that much. So really thinking about that.
And there's enough variance in how you can get this in your body that even those tolerances been building it back up, going from an edible one day to then vaping the packs the next day and alternating and switching out and stuff like that. There is that nuance to where the habit itself was, to me, the rolling portion of it, the grinding on my oil. When I smoked the oil, it was getting the rig set up, getting the torch set up, getting my temperature right. It was a ritual process. And so if I can cut that out and still give my body some of that, quieting that extra conversation that it's trying to have, I could see such a tremendous benefit in just cannabis in general offering that. That's why I gravitate towards it. It's because I have that means to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with ritual. I do think that like the act of grinding, so now like when I'm grinding it up, like I'm smelling it and I'm like really paying attention to it. And so vape pens, like I get their utility. I absolutely get the benefits of them, but they are very habit forming because they're like the bag of potato chips. It's just sitting there.
Yep. And
then all you have to do is this. And this is a very habit forming motion, right? It's why cigarette smokers have, that kind of hand to mouth thing. And so I do think that mindfulness is part of that is ritual. And so that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to grow their own plants. I encourage people to make their own edibles because there's something about that process that makes you more connected to the plant and therefore less likely to like abuse it by just, mindlessly consuming it without giving it kind of the attention or respect that it deserves.
It's amazing and interesting stuff. We're talking with Dr. Amanda Reiman from Personal Plants, mypersonalplants.com, and also the Chief Knowledge Officer of New Frontier Data. And I want to talk about New Frontier Data and some of the collection of information in our industry for the last portion of the show. But how was this experiment, we'll call it, received amongst the community? Like when you put it out there, it's all said and done, and you're kind of talking about this now, and you're talking about responsible usage, you're talking about, moderation is these things, as we said, a lot of activists don't. It's all about from the wake to the nighttime, right? All day long, and it's the magical plant. And some people, how is this information? Do you feel like it's been receptive? Do you feel like people are appreciative of it? Or do you feel maybe even from the big cannabis companies themselves, like we won't name some big names, are like, don't put that out there. Is it a marketing thing? We need them to smoke all day. How is this now that it's out there and now that you've realized, hey, we can be consumers who consume responsibly, like alcohol or gambling, consume responsibly, do this that way. Has that been accepted, or do you feel people are just like, that's nice, Dr. Amanda, we appreciate it, but smoke all day, every day, we don't care?
I would say it's mostly been well received. I do think that folks understand that this industry is not going to have longevity if people just, consume, because folks are going to move away from it, or they're going to have an overdose, or they're going to have an experience where they're not enjoying it anymore. The joy is kind of taken out of it. And for this industry to survive long term, people need to maintain that joy around the use of cannabis. So I do think that folks understand. And I have had a lot of people that have thanked me, who say they're kind of tired of hearing these, cannabis is great for everything all the time messages, because that hasn't been their personal experience. Yep. And so a lot of folks were very happy that I was kind of bringing it out, but not in like a prohibitionist shaming kind of way, but more in a like public health, like, let's talk about what mindful, healthy consumption looks like. Not to say you shouldn't consume, but just that you should think about it. Like we should think about our food consumption, and we should think about our social media consumption. I mean, these are all things where if we overconsume, it's going to have negative effects in our life. And cannabis is no different. So I do think, of course, they could be talking bad about me behind my back, but I do think that folks, for the most part, have been very receptive. I'm the scientific advisor for Miss Grass, which is a great cannabis company. And they have been very open to me publishing things through their site about moderate consumption and mindfulness and, what some of the risks are. And so I do think that cannabis companies don't, for the most part, I'm not going to speak for everyone, for the most part, do not want to be the next big tobacco. They don't want to have to go. And I always say that my fear is like 20 years from now, I'm going to see a commercial on TV that's like, did you work in a cannabis dispensary between the years of this and this? If so, you might be eligible for a large class action lawsuit.
I feel like that could I totally understand that.
Like that to me is Oklahoma in 25 years right now. Like that is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I don't want that to happen. I want us to look back and say, this was a really good idea to legalize cannabis. And it's really helped people move off of opiates and move off of alcohol and have better relationships with their bodies and with their families. Like, I want that to be our future story, and not we just consumed it so much that they took it away from us because we couldn't handle it. I don't want that to be the story. So anything that I can do to help facilitate that like long-term societal relationship with the plant, like that's what I'm here for.
I can't even believe I just forgot what I was going to say. Do you find yourself being a more data-driven person or a more like emotional person when you come to making these decisions in general? Like, are you someone who would read the study or the research paper and that is what really gets your brain going? Like, I need to make a personal change, or is it something else?
I would say I think my process is it's the data. Like, what do the data actually say? And then when I understand what the data say, my next step is, how do I message this? Like, how do I take what I now know and bring it to people in a way that they're going to accept and that they're going to be interested in? And that's going to make sense to them. In social work, we talk a lot about meeting people where they're at. And so if I just like read data and then just spout it out, that's going to go over a lot of people's heads. It's not going to be meaningful to them. But if I couch it in a personal experience or something I know they relate to, then they're able to hear me right? And take in what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is based on fact and is based on data. And that is really the way I like to operate.
It's interesting. Speaking of data, and you are the Chief Knowledge Officer at New Frontier Data. Got it right that time. New Frontier Data, the preeminent source of collecting information in the cannabis industry. Put out wonderful e-newsletters. I love the e-bit they send out every week. Get tons of information that come from New Frontier Data. And if you work in the industry, the database that's provided for different retailers is a wealth of information. If you've never been to New Frontier Data, if you want to know bullet points and information about this industry, they're collecting it, right? From politics to sales. They're putting this information together. But we're in an industry that feels like, and we sit sometimes between the legacy growers and the people with their hands in the dirt who just are, and they collect data points, whether it's, phenotypes and temperatures, whether they know it or not, but they are more about the earth and the ground and the plant. And then we have money, and we have big business and marketing a lot of times is driven by numbers and data and information. Is New Frontier Data, is someone who I've used it. I've been on New Frontier Data a lot. We use it a lot in the Cleveland School of Cannabis where I work. I teach all this information, but I'm a very businessy centric person. Is that a resource that you feel is used mostly by like big companies and up and comers, or has what we'll call this legacy market, the growers, are they getting into the data, or is it more of a new cannabis business tool?
I would say that both sides are getting into the data, but the business side is onboarded faster.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Because they're used to using data. So, they have a business, they have to make projections, and they have to do financials, and they have to show their investors why they think they're going to make money, and they have to understand what the trends are in the market so they can make wise investments in their business. Like, they already get it, right? So they come to us and they're like, oh yeah, I know why I need to use this. I know why this is important. When we talk more about the legacy community, they want to know these things too, but they just have never been in an environment where it was part of their practice. So it's a little, again, meeting the person where they're at. It's stepping back a little bit. And we do these data power hours at New Frontier that are really like, why data, right? Just starting from a very simple place of how can data benefit your business? Like, what are some of the things that you're going to want to know if you're growing a brand or if you're a cultivator? And really just starting from that point. I mean, look, I live up in the Emerald Triangle. Like I said, we have a lot of folks up here that don't even have internet. So, saying that now they're going to have to understand, like the margin reports on the subcategory of gummies in this market from this state to this state, it can be really overwhelming. But, one of the things I like to bring people back to are the consumers, right? Because at the end of the day, understanding who the consumer is something that everybody needs, regardless of the size of your business or the vertical that you're in. And so we do a lot of data collection around the motivations of consumers. Why do they pick certain products? What do they care about? What are their use patterns like? Who are they as people? And I think that that's information that's valuable across the board. So even if you're a legacy cultivator who just started your very first business and you've been kind of doing this for a long time, but not as an organized business, your first question is, well, who cares about my product? Like, where are my people?
Right.
And, so going in and figuring out like, okay, which consumers, view organic product as being really important, which consumers aren't driven so much by potency. These are all really important questions to answer. And, up here, we've recently started an appellations program where different growing regions can claim appellation status. Like they have the Burgundy region in France and,
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you have to collect a lot of data because you have to show that your growing region is environmentally unique to all other regions and therefore produces a plant that is unique to all other regions. And one of the biggest hurdles in getting this program up and running is teaching these folks how to collect data. And I mean, it's really tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I know, because they're not coming from that university side of things where it is trained and to such a high degree that how you collect the data is just as important as the data you're collecting in general, and then and so on, and how that applies down the line. I I can't think of a farmer who's seeing that more than, well, last year I got a 30% yield and that's my bottom line. This is an extra, reason why I'm doing it this way. What, as companies are using, I've never seen a cannabis company, I've never talked to one yet in the country who hasn't used your data to say something to me in any regard. And whether it's
every PowerPoint presentation has at least a copy and paste from some New Frontier Data Selection. Guilty myself, every one I make.
That's why we're here.
And so my thing with it is, in a lot of ways, when I see that data projected to me in that presentation, I have a hard time hearing most companies applying that data correctly to themselves. They always look at these massive numbers, these huge umbrellas, $22 million, tax windfall for the state. And they're not actually truly understanding what is their market share based on that data. As your job is to display all of this, where do you think that New Frontier in the next couple of years can get better at displaying this, making use of this information besides just an overall statistic? Or, where do you see the push for New Frontier data is going to be? Is it blockchain? Is it something else that makes it live longer?
Well, so there's a couple things. First, we do webinars where we do deep dives into our reports. So we just did one last week or the week before. We had our new market report come out. And so we're taking people through that report and we're explaining exactly what the numbers mean. So that they're able to use that and better understand that. So I think that that's really important. We also have our consumer survey where, if you are interested in data, but you're a little bit not as familiar with the business side and how to translate some of the numbers around like state tax revenue into like what the marketability is for you, going back to who the consumer is a pretty universal place for people to understand. So if you have a certain product, you can look at our data and say, all right, this is the market for this product. Like these are the number of people that are buying this product in this market right now. And this is who they are. This is their consumer archetype. And, so it kind of takes it. We have two kinds of data, qualitative and quantitative. And quantitative are the numbers and qualitative are the stories, right? So a lot of our data is quantitative, but what we try to do for people that are trying to storytell is kind of shift it into the qualitative context. So yes, this is a whole bunch of numbers, but this is what that means in terms of telling the story.
Yes, I was just going to say it's the story. It really is. It's how a company can say, this is how we fit in, and this is why our messaging is this way. This is exactly who we are wanting to talk to. I really like that New Frontier broke down the archetypes in the way they do as well. I think now the archetypes of an industry are across all industries, and you will see a lot of those same characteristics pulled out with someone who's in the plastic business or someone who's in the steel business. And I'm really glad that you do that. You quantify that in that way.
Yeah, I love our archetypes. And again, even if you're not someone who's used to using data or really understanding, kind of what the quantitative piece is, understanding whether your target consumer is a savvy connoisseur or a medical lifestyler or a holistic healer is going to tell you a lot about how you should set up your business, how you should market, what you should spend money on, what your packaging should look like. And so you can tell a lot of those things without having to get deep into the Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, it is interesting as companies grow up, right? Everyone wants to create a cannabis company for people to consume all day. But the reality is, like, the weekend warriors and those archetypes are probably the majority of consumers. Like you said, the smaller percentage are, and I learned this from New Frontier data, the smaller percentage are medicinal patients and all day users. The majority of consumers are part-timers. All right. And the majority, and we have more and more age groups getting older and older, which are not heavy consumers, but they're consumers for a lot of therapeutic different reasons. So it's really great information, I think, as a lot of companies get started, they're able to dig into it and use it for their branding and such. I want to talk about a number for a little bit before we go. So there's been some numbers that are scary for the cannabis industry. And one of those is, as states legalize, we continue to see the decline of the wholesale pound across the country. We see horror stories, and people will put that in air quotes if you're listening on audio, air quotes there, of large companies moving out of California, the big players. And what's this mean for the future of the industry? And as someone who is, there as the chief knowledge officer, New Frontier Data. Like, you have this insight. I don't think and I don't think, Dustin, I think you agree with this. We don't think the industry is in trouble, but you are the one that's digging into these numbers, and you see these clickbaity articles, I think, that talk about the demise, or at least the troublesome, precipice that this industry sits on between, caving in and exploring new heights. There's a lot of analogies and metaphors tossed in there. What is it like? So that number, we know that wholesale pound is going down in a lot of legal states. Legality is tough because that means your neighbors also sell cannabis. We're in Ohio. It's medically illegal. Michigan does a lot of money from us. If we go legal, adult use, Michigan sales are going to go down because there's a lot of adult use patients that are traveling to Michigan. No one in this room. They're traveling to Michigan for their products because it's illegal across state lines, of course, but it's super cheap. So let's be real. It's super cheap up there, So is the industry, you look at the numbers, is the industry in trouble? Like, what do the numbers really say as someone who analyzes them and looks at them often?
Well, first I'll say that the price of the pound during Prohibition was completely artificially inflated. It did not reflect how much it actually cost to grow weed. It reflected the risk that the people that were growing the weed were taking in growing the weed. So, you were basically paying for their risk. You were paying for the fact that they could go to prison if they were being found out. And so that really inflated the prices. Now that we're in legalization and cannabis is becoming more like a commodity, which is what it actually is, you're going to see the price drop. People are learning how to grow at scale for much cheaper. This is not surprising. This is absolutely something we would expect to see. The other thing I'll say is that we're still in our infancy. Like, this is a very bumpy ride. Alcohol prohibition, when that ended, it wasn't like, boom, it was over. And the next day you had this really robust and functional alcohol retail system.
No, it took us like 5 decades to get to like craft and others. It was like 3 companies for the longest time. It wasn't until the last 20 years where we actually have small brewers and all these other things like making success. It took a long time for alcohol not to be dominated by 2 or 3 large players in the industry.
So, it's not that surprising that, especially given that we don't have interstate commerce, all businesses have to exist within the states that they are. We have this patchwork of regulation, like you mentioned, where we have a lot of border dispensaries and people that are doing cross-state trips in order to purchase. You still have a very robust illicit market because we had it for so long that, especially in states like New York and California, it's going to be a very long time before the regulated market is able to fully pull people away from the unregulated market. And so and you also have federal prohibition, which means that the really big companies, like the actual big companies, like not the MSOs, but like the Googles and the Amazons and the Unilevers and the Kellogg's, and the ones that own all of the businesses. There's only like 5 companies out there that own everything. They haven't even gotten involved yet because cannabis is still illegal federally. So right now, we have a whole bunch of small and medium-sized companies that are dealing with the fact that the inflated price of risk is starting to fall away, that we're seeing the price of the pound drop, that we're seeing people learn how to grow at scale for much cheaper and much more efficiently. And so we are going to continue to see turbulence in the market. Like, this isn't going to go away. It's not like we're going to all of a sudden smooth out and it's just going to be like, that was great. But this is going to continue. It's going to continue through federal legalization. And there's going to be a huge, mergers and acquisitions time, right? So when federal legalization happens, those very, very big companies, like actually big companies, are going to come in and buy up a whole bunch of companies, right?
Yeah.
When I was at MJ Biz last year in Vegas, I was like, why are there 30 companies making glass jars for eighths? Like, why? And so that's not going to be the future. Like, some very, very big company is going to come in and buy up all the successful little ones and just make the jars, and they'll just be the person that makes the jars. Wow. So we haven't even gotten there yet. So I do think that in the interim, it's going to be very turbulent. I think that we're going to see a lot of companies come in with big hopes and big dreams, and those hopes and dreams are going to be dashed. But then again, it's also a very exciting time because this point in time will never come again, right? So once the industry is mature and it is just 5 companies that own everything, and cannabis is super cheap and it's available next to the alcohol at Safeway, we'll look back and be like, God, remember those exciting days when we had all these different products and these teeny tiny companies? And I mean, it's such a moment in time, but it is fleeting. So, I would say to folks that are involved in the industry, don't expect it to get smooth all of a sudden. Even if we reschedule, even if there's federal legalization, even if there's interstate commerce, it is not going to be a while. It's going to be a while until cannabis, the industry is really stable. So you're either in it and enjoying the turbulence, or you're like, you know what, let me come back in 10 years when it's really boring.
I just thought about that. We often talk, Dustin and I, we talk to, you knew Dustin, we talk to a lot of people that want to start cannabis companies, and a lot of them are traditional little shifts on something that's popular. Like you said, a glass jar or a plastic jar or a glass jar with dimples or a glass jar with concaveness or this thing. So it'll be interesting to see what those other companies do as they kind of mature and get older. That means our time is up there. The music has hit. Dr. Amanda Reiman from Personal Plants, the founder of mypersonalplants.com. Visit there to book an appointment and develop a healthy relationship with your plant. Also, New Frontier Data. Data or data? That's the final answer I need right now. Is it data? Or is it data? Data. New Frontier Data. I'm never going to say it right again, but I'll give it a shot. Dr. Amanda Reiman from New Frontier Data.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Premier resource. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Amanda, for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, everyone, give us a subscription. We would appreciate it. Check out all the links for Dr. Amanda's sites, mypersonalplans.com. And everyone, we'll see you next week, everyone. Have a wonderful week.